Grammar Science. My name is Charlotte Mills. I'm from the Academy of Classical Christian Studies in Oklahoma City. We have 3 campuses across the metro. So we have one on the south side of the city, one in the middle of the city, and one on the north side of the city. And we have over 600 students. And so I'm responsible for pre-K through 12th grade at our school for science. I also teach 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th this year. And so I stay pretty busy. And I actually skipped a slide. There we go. So to give you a little bit of background about me, I've wanted to be a science teacher since I was 15 years old. I didn't feel qualified to become a science teacher, and I thought that if I joined the military, I'd become a more entertaining school teacher. So I joined the Air Force at 17 years old, and I served 6 years. And after my time in the service, everyone was very surprised because I was an electronic technician. I can fix anything on the runway. They were very surprised when I still pursued the science education part of where I originally started at 15 years old. And so I have a bachelor's degree in science education, and I also have a master's degree in STEM curriculum. So what's really funny about STEM curriculum is I learned all these different ways of teaching science in college, and I was so excited. These are all new, right? The 5 E's of education, like these, the learning cycle. Like my first job out of college was at a classical school. I needed a part-time position, and that worked out really well for me. Showed up thinking, oh, I have all these new tools that you guys have never heard of. And then they were like, no, that's memetics. And so I actually was highly trained in memetics. They just used different terms for them. So I was really surprised that I already knew exactly where the education was headed. So here at the bottom, memetic instruction guides students to meditate on and contemplate models or types, to present ideas in concrete forms, so students can inducively raise the understanding or an idea of truth and then apply them. So that is where we're headed today. We're going to talk about how to write a memetic lesson in science, which I think is a very useful tool. A lot of times people don't know where to start. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I do not think this is the only way. There's a multitude of different ways that you can teach a lesson, and you can teach it well. This is just one way that I have found that has worked well for our school. So the lack of teacher interest in science is more likely to be seen a problem in the elementary school, which is 46%, than that of high school. I don't really like this statistic because, of course, if you're in high school, most likely that teacher pursued, just like me, pursued that education degree in that particular subject. But it does point out that there's a lack of interest in science, and so I'm hoping today to help with that. So let's take a second and talk about cookies for a minute. So can someone tell me what their favorite cookie recipe is?
Sugar.
Sugar cookie. Do you always use your recipe? Do you always pull it out? Every single time?
Every
All right. Have you ever adjusted it?
No.
The recipe? You use it the same?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It might taste different if I did.
It might taste different if you did. All right. Does anyone have a favorite cookie recipe that they adjust every single time? Or not? What do you have?
I do lemon cake cookies. And so whether I want it to be sweeter, or I can add cream cheese to it, or more butter, less butter, more milk, whipping cream, kind of whatever I want it to look like or feel like or taste like.
That's right. So I feel like science runs that way. If we start off with a plan, let's say that we borrow a lesson from a website. We try it the first time as written, and a lot of times I have to tell my staff when we have new people come in, I'm like, yeah, I referenced that page in the book, but I have slowly adjusted it over the years to fit what we own, to what the students are going to learn and the outcome for the lesson is. So I always think if you start, you have somewhere to start, and then you can adjust as you go. And jumping 2 feet in, sometimes it's hard. I'm sure many of you have tried a recipe that you were like, ooh. Recently at our school, we have a lady who loves to bake pies, and she had posted that she didn't know what this particular one was going to taste like, and she was really excited whenever she found that that particular pie ended up tasting really amazing when she was done. So, and she jumped 2 feet right into it, and then even shared with all of us that she was going to try it. So I thought that was kind of interesting that we were just about to talk about baked goods, and that's why I brought chocolate today. My children begged me to take cookies, but I was like, no, we'll just do chocolate, it'll be great. Oh, wrong way. So if someone wouldn't mind reading this portion for me, it's part of the mimetic lesson. It's kind of going to give you an out view of where we're headed. Anybody feel like reading?
Mimetic teaching is neither didactic, lecture-based, nor Socratic, question-based, though it uses both questions and direct instruction. Mimetic instruction guides students through the natural process of imitating an idea, that is, embodying a general concept in a specific instance. Since this summarizes what happens when a person learns something new, mimetic teaching develops habits that students internalize and can apply to every learning experience. Both the content and the form of the Lost Tools of Writing teach students how to think, write, and create. On top of all that, this mode of teaching is surprisingly efficient.
Okay, so at our school, we were running into a problem where we have two different models. We have some students that come 2 days a week and some that come 5 days a week. And we couldn't find a science education model that fit that. I mean, it was a little bit unique. So what we did is we took everything we had, we got teachers together who've been teaching classes for a really long time, and we rewrote the entire 1st through 5th grade curriculum into this mimetic format. It works really well for our teachers. It's easy to follow. It also fills in gaps sometimes that our teachers are not well educated in. And sometimes it's just things that you don't know off the top of your head, like, what are the parts of the spider? What was that? And so it kind of gives them a reference point. So here is like, where do we even start? So the first place that we start is with a truth, which is on the back. The truth should be found at the top of each lesson. It's the objective set for the teacher to achieve. So this sometimes you can call it a concept. What concept are you running for? Where are we even headed with this? So starting right there with the truth. What is what I want my students to know? So the next portion is prepare. So how do I then prepare my students for the truth that I just decided that is what I would like my students to achieve, or the teacher to achieve? Prepare is the first part of the lesson plan. This is your hook to pull your students into your lesson. It allows the teacher to fill in any knowledge needed before starting the lesson. This allows the teacher to discover prior knowledge the student already has or have about the subject. I kind of used a hook at the beginning with asking you about cookies, something that all of us were able to relate to, because most of us have to cook at our houses. It's not my favorite thing, but I do definitely cook at my house. Don't skip this part. I'm guilty of skipping it, and it drives me crazy when I do it. So don't skip this part to save time. Don't do that. You'll find that it's a useful part of the mimetic lesson. You are asking your students' brains to link knowledge that they already have with new knowledge that will help them with memory retention. So what is a hook, right? There is a multitude of different ones, and I've provided you a list here. So hooks are short openings to any lesson. With young students, it should be 3 minutes or less. So it can be a little bit longer. Since I teach in the rhetoric school, sometimes we'll have a pretty lengthy conversation. We had a pretty lengthy conversation about prosthetic limbs. They were very interested in that, and that brought right into the nervous system because that was something that interests them. So right here you can do a class discussion, and that's one example. Conduct a class survey. What do you think about this? A sensory table or activity, especially of younger students. A lot of times my kindergarten teachers will ask me, can you pick me up a pumpkin? I want to open up this pumpkin and look inside of it. And I'm like, sure, that's a great way to introduce seeds. Play a game, go for a walk. I have recently found that my rhetoric students love to be taken out of the classroom and go for a walk. We went and looked for birds. It felt kind of strange at first, but my students really enjoyed getting to go outside and look for birds. And the funny thing is we did not see a single one. We found a dead one, which was a whole nother conversation. But I was like, this was a really great way for them to realize, well, it's winter time and there's fewer birds this time of year. And so going outside and looking at things that we're trying to recognize. One of my first grade teachers this year asked me for a plastic container top and Vaseline, and she hung these from the trees. And wind would blow and catch things. And then they were able to see what was in the wind, which I thought was very clever. And it was her way of introducing weather to the students. So they were able to look at what the wind is passing along. So they were able to, I think there were some seeds in there and some dirt and other debris which was caught by those little tiny discs. So that might be an intro for you. Physical movement increases focus. So like a song, we have a song motions to one when we learn about geology. And so we learn about the different rock formations using hand motions, which is probably, I think, in the third grade grammar program. A funny video. I love leading with a funny video, especially in the grammar, can definitely grab their attention. And have students come up with a skit. Sometimes they wanted to show you what they do know, and then they can come up with a good skit. So can any of you come up with a hook that you've used that was very successful? Now that I've given you some. Nobody? That's okay. Gave a pretty good example. So now we're going to go into a little second part. Can you draw, what do you think of when someone uses the word energy? So if the little notepads and pens that are on your table, that's what they're for. You can turn those pieces of paper over and just draw what you think when someone uses the word energy. I had my students do this portion of my presentation. It was pretty interesting, the things that they did draw. I love it.
I'm not a science teacher. I'm not a drawer. I have a ball rolling.
That's a good one, though. Okay, so after I've given you a second or two, I've walked around the room, and it looks like all of you have successfully drawn something. I saw a few words, so they must, instead of drawings. That's okay. Would someone like to share their picture with me?
I did jumping jacks.
Jumping jacks?
I did a hydroelectric plant.
Hydroelectric plant. We're just going a whole nother level.
I did a battery.
A battery.
She did a ball moving.
A ball moving.
A muscle, because I don't have the energy to go work out.
A muscle.
My 4-year-old.
Your 4-year-old. Perfect. I have a 9-year-old, and they're definitely very active individuals. I heard someone say coffee, which I thought was a pretty good choice for energy. Anybody else like to share their example? Okay. So, that is the starting of a lesson. So we just started with a hook, and this is another example of a hook that we just did. You just drew me what you thought energy was. And so this next part is the teacher is presenting a truth here. In grammar classes, this is filling the new concept, so new vocabulary is being thrown in. I am assuming, or I'm guessing, that my students had some concept of energy at this point. I had a variety of different things. People drew atoms on the board. People drew like complete chaos, and that was pretty good. But now I need to fill in some new concepts using present. The teacher can present books using factual information, explain the concepts to the students using a worksheet or as a guide. They can also be done in a variety of ways to present new information. Students will be able to link these new terms to the next part of the lesson. So here are a few ways you can present that. Conversations about the drawings over energy. So here I could start adding some information. I could be like, all right, so we have a power plant. What type of energy is that? Over here we have a ball rolling. What type of energy is that? Then I could also have read from a book. So today I'm going to read you a book, one of my favorites. It's Archimedes and the Door of Science. And so I'm going to read you this little section that's on page 39. It says, when Archimedes returned to Syracuse, his mind was full of things that he had never learned or had learned in Alexandria. The days did not seem long enough for exploring all the ideas he had and working out all of the proofs. He sat for hours drawing his diagrams in the sand on the floor of his workroom. Most geometric work these days in ancient time, they had no pens or pencils or erasers. Papyrus was too scarce to scribe on and throw away. It was difficult to change or correct diagrams and cut into a clay tablet. But if you have ever drawn in the damp sand on the beach, you can see why using the floor was a good practical idea. Archimedes drew swiftly and erased by smoothing the sand. Then he was not in his workroom, but sitting by the fire in the evening, he drew diagrams in the ashes of the hearth. Even in the baths, he traced geometric figures on his oil-covered skin. Sometimes he amused himself by working out geometric problems and proofs with actual things. That's what experimenting is, proving ideas with things instead of with words and diagrams. He and King Hero enjoyed many arguments over this. Archimedes said that pure reasoning was the most beautiful thing in the world, that nothing was more perfect than an idea reasoned through from the beginning to the end. And King Hero said that mathematical ideas were nothing in themselves until they were applied to practical things that everyone could understand and appreciate. Archimedes pretended to scorn the idea of reducing the pure science of mathematics to more than a practical science of mechanics. But he must have enjoyed it because he conceived some wonderful things. One kind of mechanics deals with the kind of machines and how they work. But scientists think of mechanics in another way too. Mechanics is an action of forces on things, on solid things like metal, on liquid things like water, or gases like air. Force is a power or energy. So this might be a good resource. On this next picture, here's another way of presenting it. I have a picture of a child on a diving board. And so here I'm going to introduce the idea of potential energy due to position. So he's not moving yet. And then on my next picture, I have kinetic motion. So here are two concepts that I'm presenting. These are new terms, kinetic energy and potential energy in this particular example. So I just offered a variety of ways that you could do present. The next part is my favorite, is comparing types, experimentation, activity, or building a model. Comparing types might be comparing the lesson or unit before or after so that you have, or unit before or after so that you will have to look for correlations, Students might even be able to link the truth to other subjects. So here, on the very next page, I have bags of coins on your table. And I will tell you that I tried to get my 8th grade students and my 6th grade students to listen to my full presentation, but I made it to this point right here and never made it past it. So, in this particular example, if you will please take the nickels that are in your bag and line them up as shown. So these two nickels on the end should be touching, and one a little bit further apart. So on this next picture, and my students did critique me on how this should look, hold down one coin with the index finger that is touching the other coin. So you're going to hold down one of the coins. And then on this very next page, we're going to have to flick the other coin into the other coins and then observe what happens.
The one with our finger on it?
You're going to flick the further one away. This one. You're going to flick into the other. It. Okay.
You never made it past this.
Did not. It was super fun. Okay, so what did we observe in this activity?
I'm not very good at hitting it.
That is actually a really good observation. It does take a bit of practice to get it down. What did we observe though?
It looks like that ball thing, you know, that hits like this. Yes.
It's transferring, Newton's cradle is what it is. It's transferring energy through the coin. And it's a really interesting idea. So now what I would like you to do is I provided you some pennies because I didn't want you to steal my quarters. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I didn't know if they were going to have a vending machine or like, I'm really thirsty and someone provided me and then you leave me like $1. I didn't want that. So try another configuration with the coins offered. So try some different ways. See how long you can get it to transfer that energy. That one's a good one. What do we got? Try. Oh,
Force of momentum.
moved a multiple of them.
It didn't move as much, but it was still moved.
It did. Why do you think it didn't move as much?
Well, I think the nickels are heavier, but it's a longer line for the energy to transfer through.
That's right. So you have the nickels that are heavier,
Yeah.
which is causing it not to.
Right.
See, I like that method too of transferring energy. Oh, so we're swiping pennies over here. Oh, there we go.
She's like Carolyn, but she likes the roll up. She's like, your turn.
I gotta do this amount
hit it.
of pennies. Is that?
I've
Well,
seen
you have
some.
to hold one down too.
I've seen people cheat and like.
That's what I was doing.
It's not cheating. It's just another. You just made it go.
Don't worry, take your time. You have 2 hours.
Flying in my mouth.
I'm losing pennies at a rapid rate.
The experiment can be how long will this keep them busy?
Oh, a really long time.
Because we're still doing it.
I know. It really is an
Science teacher, you should know that. I assume it has to do with the arrangement and just the transfer of energy. It probably wasn't all perfectly squared up, but I don't know.
So user error.
User.
Penny is going pretty far if you just.
What did I not say? I love it. Okay. All right, friends. This is probably one of my most favorite things to do. I could sit and do this all day, honestly. And so the fact that I even tried to talk to my students after this activity, so I don't know how the rest of this talk's going to go, but I think it'll be great. So here's another idea if you were looking at energy. These are some art ideas. So not just the coin idea. And this was, it cost me nothing to do this lab besides steal coins from my coin. Cost me nothing. I just brought bags in those. Yeah, but I'm going to get hopefully I'm going to get my money back. So here are a couple of ideas to look at energy, especially if you have some little kindergarten, first grade. This is a super fun activity. When I taught 3-year-olds, they loved when I would bring in paint and marbles, and they could roll them around on white paper within. Right here it's showing a bin, but you could totally go to the Sam's and buy or ask them for their brown boxes that hold soda cans. And those are perfect for this particular activity. Here, I've never seen this one, and when I say get messy with grammar science, I think this would be pretty messy. But they're flicking a rubber band. That's also showing some. And they're also using, right here, an eyedropper, and that is then running down the paper. So you could also do a couple of different things with that one, with different liquids to see how fast that they run. So comparing types. Not every experiment will work out the same. I've been pretty lucky. I've tried this 3 different times, 6th grade, 8th grade, and now with adults, and it's doing pretty close to the same activity. I don't believe any experiment or activity is ever a failure. There's always something to learn and explain to students. Since I've taught so many different classes, sometimes I'm just trying something for the first time and it doesn't go the way that the book said it should go, or it doesn't go the way that the person on Pinterest said it should have went. And I used to be a little bit upset about that. And then after a while, when my students were like, "Oh, Miss Mills is a failure," and I was like, "Was it a failure?" Just because it didn't go the way the direction says. Now we have a whole new thing to talk about, and we can try it differently next year. That's why I started with the recipe. So maybe it didn't work out the first time, but it was good, and I saw some good things about it. So maybe I can adjust it for the next time that I try it. But if you don't try it, you'll never know, right? So express. So the next part, I was just in a conference a few minutes ago, and they were talking about narrative. And so being able to express those ideas. And so then you have to have your students then respond to you and tell you. So this is the next step. Students in the younger grammar classes will follow the modeling of the teacher, and the older grammar students will be able to do application activities. Some concepts will not reach the application until rhetoric school. It is important our grammar students start building this express part of the memetics. So here's a graphic. I really like this graphic, except for she's not smiling. I struggle with that part of this, right there. And so at first we're going to model. We're going to say, okay, so what did we learn today about kinetic energy from our coins? If we're modeling in the younger years, then we have them share their experiences as they grow in the grammar school. And then finally they apply. Now, not every concept they're going to be able to apply. But eventually they will. So come 6th grade is when I really start seeing them apply those good, strong abilities that they learn in the grammar school. So, here we go. So, here is some examples of leading questions. So if I was going to use some leading questions today to help my students express what they learned, where did you see the potential energy in this lab? So potential energy here, we could get some different examples. Where did you note kinetic energy in this lab? Right? Where did you note the transfer of kinetic energy? That's probably the best example for this particular lab. It definitely shows transfer of that energy through the coin to the other side, and it causes the coins to scatter. And then express. Students think and explain in their own words. That can be written, that can be verbal. It has been proven that when students write out their own words, a summary of just what they learned, not just what they learned, but what they have read, then they can retain the information. So in my 8th grade class, we write narratives. They read from their textbook, the science textbook, and then they write a narrative about it. And I've found that I used to do questions. So my first year at the school, I was like, we're going to do every question in the book. It's going to be great. And the students would just quickly rush through the chapter, answer the questions, and learn very little. But since I've started doing the narrative, I'm able to have very deep conversations with those students in the classroom, especially right now we're working on light in my 8th grade class. And those students have been able to really express the idea of how light is interacting with us every day. And it's because they're now reading the textbook and writing a narrative, and it starts to stick in their memory. And then if you have some younger students, there are shorter books, definitely. I have some stack of books over there that we use at the academy in our grammar classes that are really great resources. This one's definitely probably 4th and 5th grade students could easily read this. We read this in my 6th grade class. And so how then can you decide if they've learned the concept or not? So you're going to assess them. Assessing grammar students could be reciting from memory a question and an answer that correlates to the lesson. At the academy, we have a question and an answer for each lesson. And that is part of assessing their ability to retain what was the truth. What was the thing that we learned about today? You can do a project and a test. At the end, we spend like 4 months covering habitats in, I think, 1st grade. They do a project where each one gets assigned a habitat and they get to build a little shadow box, and it's really sweet. And then we have where they learn about plants and they bring in leaf collections from the local trees. So then they're able to apply some of the concepts that they've learned through a project or a test. Assessing DNR students might be apply what you've learned to these concepts in a test or a project. So a good example of that is right now we're learning about weather. And I've decided to decide if they've learned about weather well by having them give me a 5-day weather forecast. And they are really excited about that. And because I told them at the beginning, all right, this is how we're going to do the test for this unit. And I already handed them a rubric and told them, be thinking about how we can include dew point in our conversation. So I'm constantly going back to what I'm going to obsess them on at the end. So then, grammar teachers, you are so crucial to the DNR of a school. Grammar teachers are the first teachers to expose students to many of these scientific concepts. It's okay if not all students understand these concepts, because a lot of times it's pattern and repetition. So we are going to teach the same things over and over again. A good example at our school is in 4th grade, they dissect an owl pellet. They look at the bones. But when they're looking at the bones in that particular example, they're looking at a food chain, how that works. Then in my 7th grade class, we dissect them again, and we're actually looking for the bones, the names of them. And they have to figure out like the humerus of this one, or those type of things. So we're doing very similar activities throughout the entire grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic years. The DNR teachers need the grammar teachers to start the conversation about science concepts. So extension, this is not part of the memetics. However, I really like it. For us, since we have a 2-day model, we can send that home for parents to say, this is how you can reinforce these ideas. Sometimes it's just a YouTube video. Hey, have your student check out this really cool video. Or try this lab at home if you have these items. And then here are some ideas. So if in your classroom you struggle with including here we go. If you struggle with including things, so a lot of times you're going to read The Secret Garden, plant a garden. My 5th grade teachers are always trying to I have a little garden section, and they're always like, can we like plant something out there? And I'm like, sure, you can have like this really tiny corner of it. Charlotte's Web, we learned about insects at that point and spiders. The Hobbit, my students, I asked them, I was like, how can we include the Hobbit? And they were like, habitats. There's so many different habitats in that book, Miss Mills. And I was like, okay. Then you have history of Pompeii. Then you can learn about volcanoes. Troy, you can build rubber bands and popsicle sticks, and you can try to build a catapult. Some books over here that I have are Who Is. Those Who Is books are really interesting. So I have George Washington Carver over there. He's a pretty good example. Peanut plants, nature, draw, Madame Curie, science experiments, chemistry experiments. When we changed our curriculum in 2nd grade, originally it was all about chemistry and how does the atom work. When we changed it to people, and we started saying, who is George Washington Carver, and we did an activity with that, it's definitely sticking much better. Following with story. I love stories so much. my students tell me stories all the time, and actually I leave a large a portion of my day so that they can tell me a story about an alligator, about a scar that they had. I made the mistake in asking that question. I had never asked that question. I was like, someone tell me a story about a scar that they have, because we were talking about skin. 20 of them. And I was like, oh man. So, funding. I have, I'm an accomplished grant writer. I've earned over $4,000 at this point. I've written 3 of 4 grants, so I wanted to give you some examples because science is expensive. It's a very expensive thing. There's different ways you can find to get around it, but however, I wanted to offer you a few places that you can look for funding. Toshiba is one that I recently won a grant from them. Some of your local states, I won a grant from the Agriculture of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Pork Council gave me $500 for my garden that we have. And then local universities sometimes will partner with you. The local university near our school has given us petri dishes and have offered us old supplies that they don't need anymore just by me calling and saying, hey, I really need this item. Do you have this in your lab? Would you mind letting me borrow it? Or they've just given it to me. And the last thing, if you're going to write a grant, sometimes including the job market, business interest is very, very useful. I normally try to think of a way that this particular activity, the last grant that I just wrote was from a local oil business. And I wrote in there how light, it was light activities, were going to then affect the job market. What type of jobs could my students pursue? Now I realize that's not everything, but if you're looking for funding, it might be a good way to include that into any of the STEM. There's a lot of places that want to fund STEM, which I love the word STEM because they're doing exactly what we do. We include history in our lessons. We're including, and so when they use STEM, I always giggle. They act like it's new, but it's not. It's something that the classics have already been doing for a really long time. And so, that is the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned you all wrote your own curriculum.
Yes.
Did you use certain curriculums to kind of guide you in that process, or just start from scratch? How do you know what to do with that?
So what we did is we had a curriculum that we had already purchased, and we tried to salvage what we could of that curriculum. So things that were going well for that curriculum, we then turned into a mimetic lesson. So some of the items that we have are directly from those sources, but then we turned it into one book that was easy for our teachers to flip directly to the next lesson. And we even tell them, this is a February lesson, and I build kits for them. So I make sure they have every item that they need that lesson says that they should have. If it says a plastic spoon, I make sure they have a plastic spoon and a plastic tub that I ship to them. So that has made the science program much more efficient, because a lot of times it's like, well, I had 20 other things to plan. Right. And now I can't find the plastic spoon that I need for this lab, and there was 20 things on it. So for us, that's made it way more efficient for our grammar teachers. They just go grab their kit, they bring it to the classroom, and it has all the supplies. And then it also has made our program run more efficiently and not have to invest as much, because then we're able to get those supplies back, replenish what is missing, sometimes missing, but a lot of times those items come right back. All the little plastic pieces that I sent, dominoes and those type of things, are right there, and they're there for the next year.
How many experiments do you do a week?
A lot. So normally the way I was taught is I do experiment, lecture, test. And so I lecture very little, so it makes for a very, very active day. But in the grammar program, right now I think they're doing like one lesson a week. That's kind of a long thing. A lot of time it includes some reading, it includes an experiment, and maybe the experiment happens like week 2. So they slowly click through this lesson plan. So this lesson plan probably would have taken a grammar teacher a few weeks to get through the whole thing. All right. Yes, Miss Allen in the back.
Can you license your curriculum?
Do I license my curriculum? Yes, we do license our curriculum at the Academy. So 1st through 5th grade, we do license because it's something that we have written. Any more questions for me? Okay. Thank you so much for your time.